All right, so with the hair in place, we're actually going to do our final touches on our character design. So we'll be adding some gloves for her, some additional pieces for her legs, and also just some small clothing adjustments. And after that, we'll actually move on from the character design. So this is an exciting step. So yeah, we'll hop into cinema and get started with that. All right, so we have our scene where we last left it. And I'll just go ahead and fold in these pieces of groups that we won't be using currently. So the first thing that I'm thinking that we'll do is add our glove. And creating a glove when we're working on such a stylized character isn't something that's going to require basically any type of modeling. We're basically just going to create something that kind of wraps around her wrist like this, and then we're going to cut off part of her arm so we can have separate materials for the glove and the arm. So I'll kind of explain as we go along. So we'll start off by creating a tube, which kind of fits the purpose of this. So this is just the same kind of geometry as a cylinder, but it has a hole in it. So it looks like this. And we'll go ahead and drag it into our arm null. So I'll zero out the coordinates like we always do. And I'll hit our scale tool and I'll scale it down quite a lot to somewhere around here, shorten it a bit, and I'll put it somewhere around here. And we'll go ahead and immediately put a taper in. We do like our tapers, so I'll add a taper deformer. I'll drag it to our tube, go into object, fit to parent, and I actually want to taper the other side because right now it's going to taper this side. So I'll just set it to -y, fit to parent, and then kind of extend it outwards like this. And it's getting a bit too much curve on our taper currently, so I'll just reduce the curvature, something like this. And we'll go ahead and add some segments because as you can see, it's very jagged. So I'll just set this to 32. Oops, 32, maybe even 48. As you can tell, I like to work in these like strange round numbers like 32, 64, 48. I don't know. I don't know why, to be honest, but that's what we're doing. Doesn't really matter. But I'll add a fillet as well. So I'll go ahead and just increase the rounding on this one, increase the segment slightly, something like this. I might actually scale it up a bit so we're having a bit more of a stylized look. And I'll also just increase the inner radius as well, so we get some form of like opening here, even though we might not see it too much. So I mean, this is basically our glove. However, if we do later on go ahead and put a different material on the arm and the glove, which I want to, this is the only shape that we have to work with. So we have to create some form of shape that is just visible from the tube outwards. So a way to do that is just to go ahead and duplicate our cylinder. So I'll just go ahead and do that. I'll control drag it, and I will increase the radius by not that much actually, maybe like 8.5, 8.25 even, just a slight increase. And I'll make sure that our caps radius is maxed out. So now we have this like slightly thicker cylinder, but I want to cut it off from this part, so I don't want all of this to be visible. And we did this with the eyes, if you remember, with using the melt deformer. So I'll go ahead and do the exact same thing. And I'll come into our deformers, come to this like melted ice cream icon, and I'll drag it into our cylinder. It will kind of make it go crazy, but we'll zero out all of the coordinates like that, and then we'll set the strength to 0. And if I just go ahead and drag this out, you can kind of see what we're doing here. We're just cutting it off, and we don't want the cutoff point to be visible. We just want it to be just behind this tube that we created. And I think we can actually increase the segments on these cylinders as well. They are a bit low, so I'll set it to 48, like the tube here for our glove. And this is kind of to your own taste. I mean, if you want to have some like extreme looking gloves, so this is like super oversized and long and stuff, I mean, absolutely fine. Kind of makes her get this kind of like pirate look. But I think I did like it being a bit larger, so I'll just slightly scale it up to somewhere around there. Make sure our taper is fit to the new shape, like that. And yeah, I mean, I kind of like how this is looking currently with the gloves. So in my drawings, I also had these like bandage thingies going along her legs. I don't want some like chunky form of pants for this one. I kind of just want some kind of wrapping along her legs. And we can basically do a similar thing that we did with our tube here. It's just that we won't be deforming it in the same way, but we will use a tube. So we'll go ahead and collapse the arm symmetry here, and we'll head into our leg symmetry, and we will create a new tube. I'll create that, pull it into our leg null, and I'll zero out all of the rotation and position again. And I'll scale it down using our scale tool, so we end up somewhere around here. And I'll kind of just align this approximately. We want to add some additional rotation segments. I'll set it to 32, and we'll just slightly increase like the inner radius of this one, and I'll activate the fillet for this one too. Increase the segments here, and yeah, you set that so the bandage is just slightly rounded, something like this. Yeah, okay. So I kind of want to create this like bandage pattern where, you know, it's tapered off, and you know, you have some irregularities in how she's wrapped the bandage along her legs. And you can do this manually, but I'll kind of just show you a bit of a smarter way of doing this. So we will use a cloner again, like we did with the laces. So I'll make sure that my tube is selected. I'll hold Alt and create a cloner. We'll change this from grid to linear, and I will just drag this down to maybe somewhere around. I'll actually make this bandage like slightly shorter so we can get a few ones in there before it goes behind the boot here. So something like this. And you can actually also scale each clone. So if I, for example, set this to like 95 across all of them, it will scale down the tube 5% per clone that's being added. So they like get smaller and smaller for each clone. And I'll set that to like something super small. So maybe like 98.5 on all of these, something like this. So they do get smaller. So we do get the definition between each tube, but it's not clipping through the actual leg. I'll just pull this up just slightly. We're not really getting that interesting of a like shape or pattern just doing this. I mean, you can do that if you want, but I kind of want to create this like irregular wrapping pattern as if she's wrapped these up by hand. So kind of like as if a boxer wrapped their knuckles and then arms. So you kind of see like the wrapping pattern. So an easy way of doing that is actually add first another deformer, and then we'll kind of randomize the rotation of the cloner. So I'll come over here and create the first deformer, which is a shear. So I'll go ahead and add this to our tube. I'll set it to fit to parent, and if I just try it out, this is not the result that I'm looking for. So I think positive X is going to work, and this is doing what we want. Perfect. So I'll set that to 100, and I'll set the curvature to 0 because I don't want it to feel like the bandage is that loose. I want it to feel really tight. So something like that. And like we did with the instances of our fingers, we want to hide this deformer since we don't want these purple lines visible as we're doing this. So I'll just go ahead and hide this, hold Alt and double click both of these. Now we kind of have the beginning of what I'm trying to make, but we also want to randomly rotate these bandages individually. So when you're using a cloner, you can add effectors, is what they're called, and they basically can give you some cool and interesting results. So for example, if I just come up here to MoGraph, which is the system where you can basically control a bunch of cloners using this effector, and I'll create a random effector, and I'll just drag this into our leg symmetry. Not that it matters. This will affect the cloner regardless of where it's put. It's just that I want to have it within the group that it's affecting. So I'll just put it here. And obviously you can see that some things happen, and that is because it's currently by default randomizing all of the position. So I'll just zero all of these out, and then we can kind of just see what this is doing. So if I, for example, start to drag the position Y here, you can see that it's randomizing the Y position of all of these bandages. And that's cool, but we won't do that yet. But if I come over to the rotation here, now we can kind of start to rotate these around and get something that is a bit more interesting. If I were to rotate these, that's not really the look that I'm going for, so I'll just stick to the rotation H here. So something like this, might want to scale them down just a bit more. Something like that, maybe even 97. And then maybe even scale them up just a bit. And if you're trying to like rotate these with the random cloner and you're not really getting the result that you want to try some other kind of randomization, you can just come into the effector tab here and change the seed. So this kind of randomizes it again, and then you can kind of flip through and see what kind of results that you're into. I think that one is kind of neat, actually. Oh yeah, I like that one. So that's just basically trying out a bunch of random things just to see whatever works. And I'm kind of liking how it's looking right now. I think that's really nice. All right, so we'll move ahead with our last couple of details for our clothes. I'm kind of seeing some form of detail that can make our poncho a bit more interesting. We will probably add some nice details along the bottom of it when we're texturing, but I think we can add a form of like pocket or something around here. So like we did with the zipper, we're gonna basically be taking the same kind of steps. So I'll go ahead and head into our poncho null, expand all of this, and temporarily I'll just turn off all of our deformers so we can work with it while it's not being deformed. So I'm kind of seeing like the typical pocket shape. So it's basically a rectangle with a rounded bottom. So that makes sense for us to create a rectangle. So we'll go ahead and create that. I'll go ahead and fold down our leg symmetry so we see what we're doing. And I'll go ahead and add this into our poncho null, because we're going to need to have the pocket here, so it's being affected by our deformers later. And I'll just zero out the coordinates there just for good measure, and I'll scale it down, and we'll kind of just go ahead and drag it out. And like with the zipper, we're just going to have to eyeball the rotation and the position of this, but I'll scale it down even more, something like this. I'll kind of try and rotate it out, drag it out in the Z. I'm just gonna, as I said, just gonna eyeball it, something like this, scale it down a bit further. And this size of a pocket is, I think that's gonna work. Okay, so the first thing that we can do is, even though I recommend not doing it this soon, we are going to make this rectangle editable. And that is because I want to create roundings on the rectangle, but I only want to do it for the bottom. And we can't do that with the spline being parametric. So we'll turn off the rounding and I'll hit C to make it editable. So this is actually the first time that we're using a editable spline. So like with our sleeve, when we made that editable, we can go ahead and edit the points of the object. So with the bottom two selected, I'll right click and come over to chamfer. So with the chamfer tools activated, I'll just go ahead and drag anywhere in the scene. So we're just rounding it, as you can tell. So I'll set it to somewhere around there. I think that's looking great. And I'll go ahead and change back to our model tool. So we're not editing any points right now. And I'm kind of just going to see how this is looking on our shape. And yeah, it's looking great. Obviously, as you can tell, it's not currently flushed around the shape of the poncho. We'll sort that out later, so don't worry about that. For now, I'm actually going to turn this spline into some geometry. And you might think, oh yeah, we're going to make another sweep, but we're actually going to create an extrude object. So we can just basically come into our subdivision surface panel here, and we'll hold Alt and release on an extrude. And you won't really see much happening, but if you actually turn around, you'll see that the extrude object is shooting out in the back here. And this is currently being affected by our subdivision surface, so I'll go ahead and deactivate that for now. And while that is deactivated, I'll just go ahead and turn down the offset here to like 0.1 centimeter, so it's super thin. And then I'll also go ahead and activate caps, which is exactly as with the sweep object. This is a way for us to add roundings. So we'll just add a slight rounding of maybe like 0.5 or something like that. And when you're using extrude objects with splines like this, if we just go ahead and turn on our lines here, you'll see now that we don't have a lot of, or we don't have any geometry on this surface here. So I will want to bend this pocket around the shape of the poncho, but we can't do that if we don't have enough detail to work with here. So to solve that, we can come into the extrude object. We'll head down to caps type. So basically editing the caps of our extrude object. So I'll change this from n-gon, which is basically just a flat shape with no piece of geometry, to regular grid. And if I press this little arrow here, I can start to scale this down. And once you get down to the lower numbers, you'll start to see what happens. So if I just set this to maybe like 1, you'll see that we're getting a lot more squares here. And I don't want them as triangles. I want them to be quad dominant, so I'll set it to that. And you can see here that we're not having a lot of detail along the rectangle spline either. And that is because if there's just a straight path of the spline, Cinema 4D doesn't bother to add a bunch of points along here because there's not really any detail that we need to necessarily add. But we want that kind of detail now that we're going to smooth things out and bend it around and stuff. So if I change it from adapted points, we can change this to subdivided. So now we actually add a bit more detail here. And since I set this to 2 centimeters, we can actually do the same here and set this to 2 centimeters as well. So now we see that we have a more even distribution of faces here. And if I were to actually smooth this with a subdivision surface, it won't go all crazy like it did when it stuck out from her back. So yeah, this is looking great. So with that in place, I kind of want to bend it slightly so it feels like it's flushed against the sides of her poncho. And we'll do that again with a bend deformer. So I'll go ahead and create a bend deformer, drag and drop that within our extrude. And I'll go ahead and hit fit to parent, just so we can see what kind of angle it will bend along. So this is not the correct angle that I want to bend it along. I think positive X will do. So I'll hit fit to parent again. And this is not exactly what we wanted, obviously, but if we just go ahead and rotate this bend deformer 90 degrees in this way, like that, and go ahead and bend it again, now we can see that we can actually bend it along the surface. However, we do get a lot more bend than we need, so I'll also just make sure that I keep length on as well. If we just drag it out to the middle of our pocket and then just take our scale tool and just scale it down a bit and then just drag it in. So we basically want the bottom of our bend tool to be at the middle of our extrude object here. And now we can just kind of try and just eyeball it so it feels flushed on this side. And once I've done that, there is a neat way to just kind of extend the bend beyond the bottom part here. So if I just set this from limited to unlimited, it will kind of mimic or make a symmetrical bend from the bottom point here. So I'll just save the number 22 here. And if I just go ahead and bend this up and down, you kind of see what we're doing. But I'll have it at 22. And at that point, I think we can be happy with this pocket. I'm actually seeing that these strings that we made have a lot of subdivisions, and that is probably due to the settings of the helix. So I'll select both of the helixes and set the subdivision to 1 instead. So now we have a bit more of an even distribution. Since these have wind deformers attached to them, that requires a lot of computing power. So now I think our animation is feeling a bit smoother. And I want to create some additional details on this pocket. I'll kind of want to add some cartoonish stitching going on the inside of this. And to do that, I think we can use ourselves of a cloner and a torus. So we'll go ahead and do that. I'll create a torus primitive. I'll drag it into our poncho null here. I'll zero out the coordinates like that, and I'll scale it down. And we'll actually go ahead and group this extrude pocket thing that we just made. So I'll just hit Alt G and I'll call that pocket. And I can just drag our torus in there, and then we can just zero out all of the coordinates to just snap our torus in the right place. Then I'll just, with our scale tool, scale this down, way down, somewhere around here, I think. And I'll go ahead and switch back to our garage shading. Now, we can actually use our cloner and clone our torus along the spline that we made our extrude out of. So if I just hit Alt and press the cloner while having the torus selected, we can just head into object and then change it from grid. And instead of changing it to linear that we've done before, we'll change it to object instead. And since we don't have any object linked to it, nothing will show. But if we drag our rectangle into the object slot here, now you'll see what we're getting here. And the distribution of these toruses aren't really exactly what I wanted, so I'll set it from count to even. And I'll also make sure to head into our transform of our cloner, because if we actually try and rotate the torus while being within the cloner, nothing will happen, because right now all of the coordinate attributes will be happening in our transform of our cloner and not the coordinates of the cloner, because that won't do anything either. So make sure that we are in transform of our cloner, and now we can start to kind of rotate these around. So I'll set the rotation B here to 90 degrees. And obviously I want to kind of move each torus inwards towards the center of the pocket. And we have these position parameters that we can play around with. So if you try a bunch of these out, you kind of see what these are doing. They're kind of moving all of these clones along the axis of the rectangle, which is perfect. So if we just go ahead and increase the X here to maybe 2, something like that, that will work. And I'll of course want to sort of shrink these down just a bit because they are very big, and maybe move them inwards just a bit, 0.5, 0.25 maybe. Yeah, something like that. Great. And obviously we don't want them to completely stitch the pocket shut, so we'll need to kind of offset the start and end of the stitching here. So I'll set it to somewhere around here, and they're starting to intersect and we don't want that. So I'll just decrease the count a bit, maybe something like that. I just kind of offset them a bit. I want it to feel a bit more even. Yeah. I think these are the numbers that I'm ending up on. Maybe I'll scale down the torus just a bit, since they are getting a bit clumped together once we get into the curve here. So I'll just scale them down a bit like that. And as you can tell, we are getting some weird results where the stitching isn't really lining up with our pocket shape. And that is because we have our bend within our extrude object and not affecting the stitching. So if we just take our bend and drag it out to our pocket null, now the stitching actually follows the shape of the pocket a lot more. So now we can actually go ahead and readjust some of our transform options here. So I'll set the position Y to 0 again. And yeah, now it's looking perfect. Lovely. That looks great. I might even scale up the torus. So I'll select the torus and just scale it up just a bit like that. Lovely. And now with that in place, we'll go ahead and reactivate all of our deformers within our poncho. So I'll just reactivate all of these. And now the pocket and the stitching and everything should follow along with the deformation of our poncho, which is great. And I'll reactivate the subdivision surface here as well. And now everything looks smooth and nice. And you'll probably have a very slow playback currently, and that is because these strands of hair are within our volume measure, which is a pretty heavy thing to work with. So if you want to just play things back at a bit more of a smoother rate, we can just deactivate the volume measure and volume builder for our hair, and now things should be a lot quicker. And I'll go ahead and make sure that I save our project. And I mean, with that, we are very close to being done with the design stages here. The next step will mostly be about creating our weapon, creating the environment, and also rigging our character to prepare it for animation. And before I even move on here, I'll just do a final little tweak with our legs. I do think that her stance is a bit too narrow-legged. As I said, I want a very confident and secure pose for her. And if I just expand our leg symmetry, I can just take our leg null here and make sure that I'm in the world coordinate system and just drag this out in the X to a point where I'm happy. As you can tell, this does a lot to her attitude and stuff. And I'll move it out pretty far, actually. If you're wondering, it's about 17 centimeters in the X. So something like that. We can go ahead and play this. You see that the poncho isn't intersecting, but I don't think it is. And yeah, things are looking sick. Can't wait to animate this eventually. But yeah, I'll go ahead and reactivate our volume measure for our hair as well, like that. Lovely. All right. In the next lesson, we'll be making our weapon. So I'll see you over there.